Hi, everybody. I'm an addict named Rick. In the process of recovery. Wow. It's incredible. You know, I've been to a few good workshops today. Great. One great one today. My sponsor spoke last night. And I got something to take home with me. If you're new, welcome. You're in the right place. You didn't stumble in here. You got thrust in here.
We want to hit.
And, you know, I want to thank Zach and the program committee from MRCNA. I want to thank the whole MRCNA convention committee. Let's give them a hand. They did a fantastic job. I like to say that my life is still at risk, and therefore, I got to be on guard against the disease of addiction. You know, I don't want to go into a bunch of how I got here and what happened, but I might go in and out of that, you know, because I'm kind of like going to let God do what God do. How about that? And I promised an addict to tell this little story, and I ran into him last night, and he says, I remember this story that you told once before, you know, and it's really, you know, we get stories from each other, you know, and that's how we carry the message, and he told me what the story was, and it's so long ago that I told the story that I kind of like forgot what the story was, but it went something like this. It was two addicts, and these two addicts used to go to meetings together on a regular basis. You know, you have a friend, a buddy that you attend meetings with. So one addict would go by, and we're just going to use Joe and Bob. Well, Joe would go pick Bob up for meetings all the time. He would go by, and he would blow the horn, and, you know, Bob would come out. They would go to the meetings, and they would talk, and they would, you know, discuss recovery and kick it around and argue with each other about how it works, and you know what we do, you know. So Bob said to Joe, he said, Joe, he says, I wonder if there's meetings in heaven. And Joe says, I don't know. He says, no one has came back to tell us. And so they went to the meeting. And so after the meeting, Bob was dropping Joe off. He dropped Joe off, as usual. And he left and he went home. He said, I'll see you tomorrow. We're going to the meeting tomorrow. He said, okay, great. So the next day came. Bob went to pick Joe up. He blew the horn. And the horn blew. And beep, beep, beep. He didn't come out. So he went to the door and he knocked on the door. And he says, Bob's wife came to the door and said, he died last night. So he said, oh, that's a terrible thing. So he got in the car and he proceeded to go to the meeting. And as he was going to the meeting, he was thinking about his friend. And he heard a voice. And the voice was his friend. And his friend said, hey, he says, it's me. He says, yeah. He says, what's going on? He said, man, I want to tell you something. He said, I got good news and I got bad news. He says, yeah. He said, which one do you want to hear first? And he says, give me the bad news first. He said, the bad news is that, he said, the good news, he said, give me the good news first. He said, what's the good news? He said, they got meetings in heaven. He says, oh, wow, man, that's great. He said, now I'm going to tell you the bad news. He said, what's the bad news? He says, you're the open speaker tomorrow. something else that I went to the first English-speaking convention of Narcotics Anonymous in Quebec, and I spoke on gratitude. It was such an experience. We caught the train and we went over to Windsor and caught the train and we went to Montreal. We rode the train all the way, and two addicts. It was my wife, who is not an addict, right? Thank God. She's a power greater than myself. I thank God for her. She keeps me grounded. A lot of times I don't want to hear the shit she says, but I got to take a look at it. She knows me better than anybody. And it was another couple who is not with us anymore. They passed away. It was Joe and Phyllis C. And they caught the train with us. And when we got there, it was something. They treated us so well, man. They took us to St. James Infirmary. They took us to the cathedral. They took us to St. Lawrence Seaway. They just showed us. But here's a hit, and you want a hit, don't you?
Yeah, I want my hit.
You're going to get your hit. Don't be greedy now. Don't hold on. That's a greedy addict right there. That's my sponsor. You know how I know? See, my sponsor is such a good guy that he takes his time, his resources, and he goes all over the United States carrying the message. And I think that's incredible. At one point I was kind of jealous of him. He goes everywhere. What about me? I think I got him back this weekend, though.
Yeah.
He did men's rap. Oh, no. My sponsor, his brother, Aaron G., did men's rap just a little while ago. But my sponsor did. He spoke last night, and he was the guest speaker last night. He did a fantastic job. But back to Joe and Phyllis. When we got to Montreal, they were speaking French in one room, and in the other room we were speaking English, and we were doing the same workshop. So they had French going on over here with gratitude, and they had gratitude in the other room in English. And there was something that they did there, and I want to try it here and see if I can give you your hit. Now, it's going to take a partner. You're going to have a partner. It's called a heart-to-heart. Now, I'd like everybody to stand up, get another addict, and then take that addict and put your heart to their heart. And hold them tight and breathe in and breathe out, breathe in, breathe out, and breathe in and breathe out until your heart beats as
You two are cheaters.
At first I didn't know what to look for. It's kind of like it was kind of like smoking crack. At first I didn't know what to look for. I was like, it was like, I remember my first experience in smoking crack, right? And it doesn't matter what or how much we use, right? But, I was a drunk before I was a crackhead, I use all kind of speed and you name it, I did it. I was one of those guys that if it got you high, I would try it, right? I remember this guy that I worked with. I worked for a Ford Motor Company, and I retired from there. And thank God, man, wow. But this guy, who was an associate of mine, he was doing some illegal shit. And he came by my house and he was sweating. And he said, man, can you give me a jacket? The police is after me. And I gave him a jacket, you know. I was using then, so I gave him a jacket. Matter of fact, I was taking Anabuse. Anybody ever take that? Know that that's a rotten kind of deal. Because I drink on Anabuse. And I got sick. I was already sick. But I went to take the guy. He said, I need a ride home. The police is after me. And I said, okay. I told my wife, I said, hey, babe, I'm going to take Willie home, and I'll be back. And so she says, okay. You know, she thinks I'm okay because I'm taking Anabuse. So I get to take the guy home, and he says, man, we come on in. So we go in, and he says, man, I can't, you know, he says, I know you can't drink, you know, but I want to give you a little something. And, you know, I wanted a little something. So why I'm saying that hug is kind of like my first experience with crack was because I didn't know what to look for. I didn't know what to receive, right? So he, you know, the guy gave me this hit, you know, and I said, he said, did you get that? I just looked at him like, what? You know, and he says, get down on your knees. I got down on my knees. He put something else in there, and then he told me how to do it. And then he ran the flame up and down it. And then he said pull, then he said hold, then he said pull, then he said hold. And I got home 3 days later. I was gone. 4th of July 1985, on my way here to Narcotics Anonymous, I almost died. I almost died on my way here. I had a car accident, broke my neck, my arms paralyzed. I went through a wrought iron fence. Now check this out. I go through this wrought iron fence in 1985, the 4th of July. In 1987, the 10th of September, I got clean. My home group is at that hospital where I ran through the wrought iron fence. Can you imagine that? I broke my neck, my arms paralyzed, and I stayed in traction. I had a halo, and it had a lambskin collar around it and a vest, and it was hot as hell in July. And, I would always say, God, if you get me out of this, I'll never do this again. Powerlessness. Only to do it again. I do it over and over and over again. So after I broke my neck, I was sitting at home, and I had a bright idea that I could catch a cab to the dope house. And I went to the dope house, and I wound up, they had taken the halo off, and I wound up coming home, and it was in the middle of the winter, and I slipped and fell. And I could have re-injured myself and laid there in the snow and died. And I was able to make it home, but I wasn't finished yet. I was in and out. I was one of those guys that was in and out of treatment. Some of us can go to treatment and we can learn the lingo, and we can learn how to share our ass off, but we never really internalize it in our hearts. And so we never get better. This thing about the heart to heart is like when our hearts beat as one, that's the power, that's the juice of this program. One addict's heart beating against another addict's heart, helping one another to stay clean, and the understanding that what it is to be obsessed and compulsed with self. I was listening. I met a young lady yesterday over at the gift shop, right here, and we were over there, and she had a little baby, and she had the baby in her arms. She said, "You guys going to the convention?" My wife and I said, she said, "Yeah." She says, "Oh, I wanted to be over there," and I said, well, she says, I'm off tomorrow, and I'm coming over there tomorrow. And she said, I asked her about meetings in this area, and she was talking about the meetings, and she said there's very few meetings. And she was telling me about an experience she just had the other day where they went to a meeting, and the meeting was closed, and then they had to drive like a distance away to go to another meeting, and they wind up going to an AA meeting. And she said she said, I like to make meetings, but I can't make meetings. You know what? My wife was with me, and she's not one of us, right? And she says, hey, Rick, that's a power greater than yourself. The light came on. She said, what about those meetings on the phone that you go to? See, they have NA meetings, conference calls, where you go to an NA meeting on the telephone and you share with people all over the country, right? It's unique. It's part of our system that we have because of the, the high-tech stuff going on. So I was able to get her phone number, and now I'm going to anybody can go there. All you got to do is go to nameetings.com, and you see our logo, and they have a list of meetings, and they have the numbers that you call, and then they have the conference code that you put in, and then you put your phone on mute. Oh, I'm going to share about it. Yeah. Because at one time I moved from my comfort zone. My comfort zone is in the Detroit West Side, but I grew up on the Detroit East Side when I was a kid down by the river. But all my adult life I lived on the West Side. I bought a home on the West Side, and I had moved, and I moved back on the East Side in this old mansion. Beautiful old mansion, beautiful old house. And the only bad part about it, I didn't feel comfortable on the East Side. And by me not being comfortable, even though I knew a lot of people around that side of town, my clique was West Side. And so I slowed down going to meetings. I stayed over there for 6 years. And I'm not proud of it, but I probably didn't make no more than 20 meetings in that 6 years. And I got real sick. I was sick. I was sick of myself. You know how you get this shit don't make no sense. I would see the treatment center. Walking down, the treatment center was right up the street from me, and they would walk the clients to the bus stop, and they would have their blue books, and they would be going. And I told my wife, I said, they're going to a meeting. She looked at me, she scratched her head, she said, why don't you go with them? She was sick of me too. She was sick of me too, because once we get to the point that we stagnate, like the literature says, it's a downhill thing. If you're not working, if you're not helping people, if you're not carrying the message, you're going downhill. You stop going to meetings, you get real sick without the dope. The dope is not the problem. You know what I mean? I arrested that. And the other part of that is that in the first step, you're the only one that knows. It says it in the literature. You're the only one that knows it yourself if you surrendered or not. Nobody can tell you, oh, you ain't ready. They can say that, somebody said, oh, yeah, you got the program. They can say that, but for real, in your heart, do you feel like you're through as a drug user? And I come to the meetings, and I started going to the meetings in 87 by way of AA. I was going to AA meetings and NA meetings. And you know what? I didn't get treated very nice at AA meetings because the kind of stuff I was sharing. I was sharing more about feeling and emotions. They didn't want to hear that. For some reason, they just didn't want to hear it about the feeling and emotion part of this. Because I realized that I'm an emotionally immature person. I don't know if y'all can identify with that. But, and I still want what I want when I want it. and all that old good stuff. I'm talking about with a bunch of time clean. You know, over 30 years clean, going towards 31. I got 30 years and 10 months clean. You know, and a lot of it is recovery. But there has been some times that I was doubtful whether this program was really working in my life. I knew I wasn't using, but when I was in the back of that police car and shit with them handcuffs on and doing some stupid stuff that I could have prevented, I shot a gun at my own son. Yeah. I shot at my own son. And all I had to do was close the door. He was outside. I told him to get out the house. He said, I'm not going nowhere. And I said, get out the house. And I was watching his baby. You know, I was changing my grandson's diaper, his son. And I think Aaron shared it earlier about we carry this disease. And are we transferring it to the people that we love, or did they give it to us? I believe that my son was an addict, but he hadn't got to that point that he identified himself as an addict, because he started going to meetings with me when he was about 8 years old. And he learned the lingo. He could talk it. You know, he would go to the therapist and tell the therapist what the therapist wanted to hear. You know, but he had made me mad that day, and I had lost it. You know, I don't, my equilibrium for being balanced when it comes to nonsense is like, my tolerance ain't that great. You know, I thought I was handling some stuff, right? But what I was doing, I was stuffing. I was budding. They call it budding, building up to. Budding. I was building up to bust. And when he said, he slammed the door as he was going out the door. All I wanted him to do was leave, and he left. And when the door slammed, you know those little tabs that hold the glass in? The tabs were loose, and the glass popped out and went boom. It didn't break, but I was already geeked up. I was already on. I was on and popping. When that glass fell, I said, oh, shit. I went upstairs and grabbed I didn't think. What? I had multiple years in the program, and I didn't think. And I got the consequence. He said, some MF going to jail today. And I said, you going to jail, you little thug. You know, he really wasn't a thug. He was a lost. He was like, like we are. We were lost. And I couldn't separate and say the same God that got me clean was going to help keep him alive and get him to the point where he would work on a spiritual development. And I ran upstairs and grabbed the gun without even thinking. Insane. Clean. Pulled off 2 shots. Pow, pow. And I was shaking like Don Knox. I shake even more when he said, some MF going to jail today. I went upstairs. I called my wife. I said, babe, she was at work. I said, babe, you ought to come home. She said, what for? I said, I shot at Mike. She said, what? She said, what happened? I said, I don't know what happened. I don't know. Too late to cry now. He left, and he walked off somewhere, and he came back. And my other son, who is his half-brother, was with him. He took off running. He the older one. He took off running. He said, Dad, crazy. He took off running, and I had the pleasure of taking him to treatment. My youngest son got murdered 2 months later after I shot him. He got murdered, and it was on our wedding anniversary. My wife, and every year when we have our wedding anniversary is the anniversary of our son's death. And what kept me afloat was you guys. It was remarkable. The support I got in Narcotics Anonymous and from the addicts in Narcotics Anonymous. You carried me, which helped me to carry my family at the time of need. It was such a beautiful thing. I mean, we had to shut the doors and put a sign on the door. No more company, because it was addicts all over the place. And and we needed a rest. We needed a break. But after my son got murdered, his baby, who had been put in foster care, we wound up adopting the child, and we had him from I think it was like 5 weeks. We had him from 5 weeks to 5 months, and then they took him out of our house because the lady lost her kids, and they had to take all the kids. And then from 5 months to 10 months, he was out of the house, and we were in the process of becoming foster parents. An addict like me being a foster parent. I did all the classes, did everything, and we adopted our grandson, and he was 10 months old, and now he's 20 years old, and I struggle with control. He's a very good kid. He's a very good kid. He's laid back. He's different than day and night of his father. And I'm so selfish and self-centered at times that I think it was year before last, I went down to his room and started on him because I run stuff around there, right? And he stood up to me like just looking at me, and that intimidation, I took that as intimidation, and I pushed him. And, I know what it was. It was the basement was backing up, and I was working on the plumbing, and I found out that he was putting these little things that you clean your teeth with in the toilet, and it was running back in the system, and it was blocking. And he said he wasn't doing it, and when I plunged it, they came up. It's like the step work when you plunger it, shit's gonna come up. And then I began to play God, and I said, Will, and he stood there looking at me, and he's never disrespect me, and I guess it might have been something that I had been building up some, because we'll butt, and then we'll have misdirected anger. You ever been the blunt of misdirected anger? You didn't do nothing to somebody, but they come back, especially addicts. They'll come back and give you a tongue lashing or treat you real cold. Well, I pushed him, and the floor was wet, and he slipped and fell. And my wife was upstairs, and she hadn't been feeling well, and she said, "What's going on?" There's a power greater than myself. And I started on her, telling her about her character defects. And she had enough. She grabbed her stuff. She called the youngest girl and said, "Can you come over and pick us up? We want to get out of here." He's going nuts. And I couldn't get her to stay, and she left, and my son left. And now, an addict alone is in bad company, right? I'm feeling like crap. And there's a knock at the door. And I go to the door, and it's a recovering addict. My wife called a recovering addict on me. Huh? She went and got a recovering addict to straighten me out. He says, "Come on out of there." It was a little bit better than the police. You know what I'm saying? At least I'm not in the back of the police car saying the Serenity Prayer with the handcuffs on. And so he said, "Put your shoes on. Let's go get a hamburger." And I'm mad at me for acting the way I act. You ever been mad at you for acting a particular way, and you have power to stop doing that? Oh, we're getting there now. Look here. We don't stay powerless. In a lot of areas, we don't stay powerless. We get power. We're empowered by a power greater than ourselves. I'm going to give you a hit. Check this out. In the literature, basic text, my sponsor, he gets on me, you know. I think he loves to see me do it. That's why he get on me, because he know I'm defiant. You know, so he says, those people that quote, you got to live this program, you got to, look, I'm glad I studied the literature. I'm glad I studied the basic text when I could. I had step studies, and we sat down and took dictionaries, and we looked at the words, and we dissect this stuff to find out what was wrong with us, like Aaron said. I better find out what's wrong with me. And check this out. It says in the introduction, based on our experience, we believe that every addict, including the potential addict, suffers from an incurable disease of the body, mind, and spirit. We were in the grips of a hopeless dilemma, the solution which is spiritual in nature. Therefore, this book will deal with spiritual matters. Now, what's so spiritual about being powerless? There goes another book. This book's a special book. I think the reason why that must have been a message. God, I guess, and then if we look at being powerless, right? In the first step, and then it goes a little bit deeper. The second admission must be made before our foundation is complete. And if we skip over this, we only know half the truth. You know what they're talking about, right? And men's rap, they talked about it, unmanageability. They talked about emotionally being unstable, unmanageability. You hurt me, I'm going to hurt you. I'm going to hurt you back. Instead of forgiving you, I go into that attack mode, right? So I learned that I have to take information from wherever I can get it in order to process my recovery. And what I learned is that I have to believe in you all. I have to listen to you in meetings. I have to read the literature. I have to, like, if I'm not at a meeting, like I make 4 meetings a week. I moved back on the west side, back to my comfort zone. I didn't like that other feeling. So when I moved back to the comfort zone, I got thrust right back into service. And so I make that meeting at my home group where I broke my neck at that hospital. I make that meeting every Monday night. It's the Ties That Bind Us Together group. And I make it every Monday night. And then on Wednesday, I go to H&I. I'm a facilitator at an H&I facility. And it's like for veterans. You know, I damn near got kicked out of the service. Yeah, I was nuts. When I used, I was crazy. Anybody know about Sugarloaf Mountain? Yeah, it's beautiful up there. I went to Sugarloaf Mountain, climbed Sugarloaf Mountain, and had to use to intensify the scenery. Is that crazy? You know, that's the kind of stuff that I used to do. You know, I remember literally, and I'm not proud of this, in my 4th step, I was real fearful. You know, I got jumped on as a kid by a larger kid, and all I knew, and I'm a thin guy, right? All I knew is that I need to do something before they do it to me, and that's the attitude I took. I took that street mentality that pick up something and knock their heads off. And when I was in the service, I got approached in an incident where the guy didn't know who he was fooling with. And I picked up the first thing closest to me, which happened to be a spade, you know, one of those shovels. And I beat this guy almost to death. Well, and I was using, man. I was out of my mind. And And they gave me a choice. They said, you can get a discharge, general on the honorable condition, or you can go downtown in Marquette and go to prison. They got a prison up there called Marquette State Prison. And I didn't want to do that, so I was frightened of those kind of scenes, and still frightened. I think it's a good fear. It helps me monitor my behavior, and the program helps me to stay in touch with my feelings so that I can monitor my behavior. So I wind up getting out of the service, and make a long story short, in that area, I had 3 women in my life that were instrumental. I mean, I had relationships with, and I had kids by all 3 of the women. And by the way, I'm married to my best friend. And it was meant to be. We've been friends since we were teenagers. And when I got back in her life, I had just broke up with the middle relationship. And it was no good. It's kind of like what Aaron's saying. This shit didn't work, and I shouldn't have been in it. But I was trying to make it work. And she almost murdered me. I mean, literally, she shot my house up. I mean, she shot through the door. Like somebody knock on your door, and you go to the door, and you peek into the peephole. And then I know it was God, said, go back upstairs and lay down. I was using. And some said, go lay down. You ain't going to let her in. You see that? Said, I went back upstairs and laid down. As soon as I laid down, I heard it, pow, pow. Shot straight through the door. And then I went to the window. I said, you going to make me kill you? And then pow, 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 shot the window out. I got 5 minutes to do this. Okay. Man, I got so many stories. Here's the hit on the powerlessness. In step 11, it says that we sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood, and praying only for the knowledge of His will for us, and the case closed on that. Case closed. We get power. So if we running around talking about we powerless, doing some crazy stuff, or we can't stop using because we're powerless, that's not true. We get power. Here's the last hit. This book that fell on the floor, that's the box. It was a guy, his name was Phil C. I don't know if some of you remember him. He took pictures up here. He was a photographer. Well, I sponsored Phil's sponsor, Chad D. And Phil died of an overdose. And when Chad went to his apartment, he found him there, purple. And as he cleaned up the apartment, Phil's sister said, Chad said, what do you want me to do with all this stuff? She said, I don't give a damn what you do with it. Because she didn't believe the program because Phil didn't live the program. So Chad got this book out of Phil's stuff. It's a real nice book. It's a nice, soft leather case. And Chad told me that Phil had it for me. But it wasn't for me. Inside, Phil engraved something for Chad. But Chad was so heartbroken at Phil not getting the program, and him. They did time together in Jackson Penitentiary. And they were good buddies. And Chad thought Phil had got it. Phil went to college and got his degree, his master's. Phil died because he didn't work the program. He gave me the book. Chad gave me the book. It says, I'm just going to, page 112. If you go in there, it'll tell us that the essential essence of God's will for us is to be all right with who we are, with or without money, with or without a partner, with or without fame, with or without, it goes in depth that we enjoy the beauty around us. You see this place? We supposed to be enjoying it, right? that's God's will for us this weekend. So with that, I'm going to say thank you again. And, it's a whole lot I could say about recovery, but, don't leave here, right? Don't leave here. If you're thinking about leaving here, like leaving the rooms of Narcotics Anonymous, don't do it. Stay here. If you think that somebody in these rooms is chasing you or pushing you out of here, you ought to look at what brought your ass in here. Together we stand, divided we fall. I love the diversity of Narcotics Anonymous. It's the greatest thing going. Thanks for letting me share.